I'm Parul Zaveri.
I'm Nimish Patel. Parul and I started our practice Abhikram, which in Sanskrit means initiation, in 1979. When we returned to India after a few years in United States and then a few years in Nigeria. When we returned, we were not sure which direction our practice should focus on, but we were very clear in which direction it would not focus on. We were strong in our belief that modern architecture, as it was interpreted at that time with the modern movement, was not appropriate for our country, and primarily because the basis of modern architecture was in universalizing the product, because the means of production were universalized, and the strength of Indian architecture was in its variety. And because these two were contradicting each other, we felt that we should not really try to evolve or mix. Instead, we should start with some of our fundamental convictions and beliefs that have been evolved and let them become the seal of our practice, and on the basis of which we can accept the project. And so we sort of established a list of 4 convictions and 2 beliefs, which were simple, but it sort of established the boundaries of our practice. The first was that all our projects must attempt conservation of resources. And resources for us was not only money. It included land, the water that fell on the land, money of course, mechanical energy, human energy, and so on and so forth. The second was that all our projects must attempt to continue the traditions of India in the form as well as the product of our projects. The third was that we felt that innovativeness for a developing country was not a luxury as we were made to believe,
but a necessity.
And the fourth was that responsible architecture would evolve only if we contextualize the design in all respects. We resolved that what we will do through our practice was to attempt to search for directions and evolve directions which will make our projects functionally, environmentally, psychologically and spiritually more contextual and more comfortable for its end users.
It was also the contradiction that we saw in the modern buildings as well as with the people who lived in the traditional villages or even in the old city, and user satisfaction was at the highest in these buildings than in the modern buildings. So that's how we started questioning also whether what we studied was right or wrong. And it is this questioning that led us to these convictions, beliefs, and the kind of attempts that we made in our practice. And we were fortunate to even get the kind of clients who were willing to go our way.
The other 2 doctrine, if we so say so, were that we believe that every problem, irrespective of its nature, scale or complexity, had an appropriate solution. And that appropriate solution would come about only by defining the problem correctly, selecting the appropriate tools and applying them judiciously. And this was really the seal of 6 convictions and beliefs through which a project brief must pass through before we accept the design assignment. And that's how we began. The other boundaries which I had was that when we were studying in School of Architecture, Ahmedabad, Professor B.V. Doshi had taught us to ask the question, why not? He taught us to fly without fear. And then when I went to US to study at MIT under Professor Horacio Caminos, His question was to ask why. And he said, for every design decision that you take, you will need to justify that it is balancing the consumption with the availability of resources. So the boundaries within which our practice operated were these two questions: the why not that we learned from Professor Doshi, and the why that we learned from Professor Kamina.
Evolving policies for conservation of Udaipur city for INTEC Delhi and INTEC Udaipur became a major turning point in our professional lives. It is through this process that it dawned on us that all that was traditional construction or traditional technologies, the construction material, if you go to see the cultural habits, the way the city was formed, the arts and the crafts that emanated in that region were a resultant of the natural heritage. So to say, the heritage fabric of the city was totally dependent on the heritage fabric of nature. This was our major realization through this process. It was a major learning. And then it became very easy for us to analyze any of the traditional regional settlements and understand why that settlement was formed in that manner, why was the construction in that manner, done in that manner, or why were the customs of that town or that region framed the way they were framed, and why the crafts, though they may be similar looking, but the content and the techniques of the crafts or the materials of the crafts varied as per the natural materials all around. And of course it depended also on the climate, the terrain that was there. And this is where the sustainability was. And that's how we started applying that meaning of sustainability into our other works.
The other reason why we call it a turning point in our lives, professional lives, is because we realized with clarity for the first time the difference between the contemporary approach and the traditional approach, and that they differed absolutely clearly in their sequence of thoughts, sequence of decision making, and sequence of execution, which had a bearing on the product. And it is because of this differences that amalgamation was not possible. What we did realize was that if we wanted to have a continuity, it was not enough that we started in present and borrowed from past. But if we began with design principles of the past and brought them all to the present 21st century in understanding, in technology, in aspirations, then the integration was full. This was led to a further milestone, if I may say so, which was the Anokhi Haveli and the house at the Anokhi farm. Anokhi Haveli was a ruin, was a part of Amer conservation project, and it was called the Chawar Palki Anokhi Haveli and is now called the Anokhi Haveli. John and Faith Singh purchased that ruin as part of our conservation initiative of Amer town, and we set out to prove that this ruin was not as dilapidated as it appeared to be, that bringing it to usable condition, it will not take as much time or as much money, and that it did not require any contemporary material to be used to bring it back to use, nor did it require any contemporarily trained professional to tell the craftsmen on how to do